I wanted to kind of pull back a little bit now and just talk about the broader agenda here because in general, whenever there's a catastrophic event, whether it's a war or whether it's a quote terrorist attack, which is, a false flag like 9/11, it brings us closer to planetary government. It brings us closer to the complete dissolution of nation state sovereignty. You have the establishment of the United Nations, you have the CFR, you have other groups like that. And Mr. Perloff, there's a pattern I think that has developed throughout history, which is these events used as a pretext to bring us closer to a new world order. When did you start to realize this pattern exists? And can you speak to it a little bit so people can understand why the quote conspiracy crowd is always trying to figure out the true agenda behind everything?
Right. Well, like I said, in 1978 was when I first was starting to wake up to this, and Gary Allen's book did talk about the drive for world government. You're right, crises are used to create change, and they're not always necessarily directly aiming at a world government. You mentioned 9/11 and suppression of our civil liberties. There's many examples throughout history, like the Panic of 1907, which was orchestrated by John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan, working in collusion, actually with the President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, looking the other way. Not only did that profit them greatly, but it caused a number of banking collapses, rival banks, I should mention, and that led to the call for the Federal Reserve, which, of course, their own representatives were at. So crises will lead to change. But in terms of world government, you look at the world wars. World War I led to the League of Nations, which is the first attempt at a world government. It failed ultimately. The League of Nations fell apart. But the Fed was created at the same time, of course, right before the war broke out, very conveniently.
Yeah.
And if income tax was also installed, so they were able to borrow money from the Fed and then have the taxpayers pay for the war with taxes collected. And so it all worked out very neatly for them. And then eventually, of course, they raised the debt and they raised the taxes, and we got deeper and deeper into the mire. But if you look at World War II as a continuation of the same agenda, you had the UN coming out of that, and you also had the World Bank and the IMF, more steps towards global governance. And of course, if we had another world war, that's probably would be a tipping point. We'd actually see us get into a world government. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But a lot of these other efforts are aimed at world government. Let's see. I had a quote. I was gonna.
The Trilateral Commission, by the way, another group, various groups.
Oh, sure. Trilateral Commission, founded by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski, in 1973, aimed at bringing together Asia, Europe, and in the Americas. They're all stepping stones.
Yes.
Like the European Union is a stepping stone towards world government. They know they can't get all the nations together at once, so you bring a regional government, the countries of Europe together, and eventually you're going to fold them into overriding a world government. They tried that with NAFTA. They were hoping NAFTA would turn into a North American Union, just as the common market turned into the European Union. You can see the pattern. It's pretty clear. But what I was going to mention was, in terms of a stepping stone towards world government, the whole, and using a crisis, right? You're talking about crises. The environmental crisis has been used as a call for world government. Quoting Jacques Chirac, former president of France.
And population control.
Yeah. He said this in a speech advocating the Kyoto Protocol, which was and is aimed at putting carbon limits on nations, right? He said, quote, "For the first time, humanity has instituted a genuine instrument of global governance, one that should find a place within the World Environmental Organization, which France and the European Union would like to see established." So here's a globalist talking about how the environmental crisis, which is also, global warming, climate change, that's also being manufactured, driving us in the direction of global government. So yes, it's all about consolidation of power. And when you completely consolidate power, that's when you would have the worst tyranny take place. The nations of themselves act as sort of a check and balance on each other. But if you get them all under one government, there's going to be no Berlin Wall you can jump over to get to freedom on the west side anymore. There's going to be no free country. You can't flee from a dictatorship to get to the free world any longer if the whole world is under one government. And that's what they're aiming for. We're definitely headed in that direction. It's been a long time. People have seen the writing on the wall for many decades now, and we're getting closer and closer to it.
Well, here's something a lot of people are very afraid to tackle. We know that you oppose globalism, but you've also had some writings I've seen against Zionism. Can you talk a little about the Zionist agenda?
Well, actually, it all fits together. If you look at the history of the House of Rothschild, they not only financed the Bolshevik Revolution, i.e., communism in Russia, not only the main financial force, they were basically John D. Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan were satellites for the House of Rothschild. In fact, when J.P. Morgan died, people were surprised to find it was only worth about $30 million. But he was advancing their agenda here in the Americas. Well, a lot of American conservatives are wised up to globalism and communism. They call Bernie Sanders is a communist. And I was in the John Birch side, and they're very much against globalism and world government, very much against communism. They thought that if you talked about Zionism, you were an anti-Semite, or you might be labeled an anti-Semite. And so they wanted to stay away from that. And a lot of people, unfortunately, in the Christian community have been faked out. I've got an article on my website, got a couple articles on Christianity. One's called The War on Christianity, Part 1, which deals with the whole modernist movement, which the Rockefellers founded, watering down the Bible, the ecumenical movement, the World Council of Churches, etc. Later on, I realized that the fundamentalists who had been trying to stick to the Bible had also been hijacked by the Rothschilds with the Schofield Reference Bible and this all-out support for the modern state of Israel.
Yeah.
See, globalism, communism, and Zionism are all funded by the Rothschilds. And what they intend to do, and this is why Trump has made recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and not Palestine, and why we're moving our embassy there, where you've got all these politicians supporting these moves. Ultimately, this whole Luciferian New World Order wants to establish, yes, a global government, but its capital is going to be in Jerusalem. And you can see statements from Ben Gurion and other Zionist leaders to that very effect. And so Zionism very much is part of the whole New World Order movement, also embracing globalism and communism. And I guess we also include capitalism in that as well, the bad kind of capitalism that we see on Wall Street.
Yeah, it is all connected, and to avoid Zionism, the quote JQ, whatever you want to call it, I think is missing a big piece of the puzzle because, like you said, ultimately, we know the Jews are building a temple or they're going to want to, at least in the very near future, build a temple in Jerusalem. I believe that could be the very pivotal. That's a very pivotal event when it comes to what will happen at the end, right? I mean, the Antichrist will sit in that temple. We know about the abomination of desolation and everything like that. But regarding the Jews, regarding Zionism, it's a topic that a lot of churches have been deceived on. You brought up fundamentalism and this marriage between these churches and the nation of Israel. A lot of different pastors out there have been deceived into supporting Israel. They think they're God's chosen people. So you're right there that, unfortunately, the deception, although there are some groups who are awake to globalism and communism, like they talked about, it seems like they're afraid to really touch on Zionism because they don't want to be labeled as anti-Semitic.